Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Zilla Wesley. Out of Washington, D.C. I am, one of your moderators for this evening. Let me introduce you to Sierra.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. You could be anywhere in the world right now, but you're here with us. And it is a great day to be together after May Day to celebrate the legacy of General Gordon Baker and Detroit's Black radical tradition. I'm Sierra Taylor. I'm based here in Harlem, New York. I am a part of the Popular Education Project with Carolyn and Zilla, as well as the National Welfare Rights Union. And again, just thank you for having us and joining us today. We want to start off by introducing the man who has brought us all together and has brought together people in struggle the world over for decades and, even more to come. General Gordon Baker Jr. was born and raised in the city of Detroit. He is one of the most important freedom fighters and revolutionaries of the 20th century. Delivered into this world by Dr. Ocean Sweet on September 6, 1941, Baker spent his entire adult life fighting against the violence of racism, poverty, capitalism, and imperialism for a better world. General remained a central and galvanizing figure in radical politics, both in Detroit as well as nationally and internationally until his death in 2014. Baker engaged in a wide array of political and labor formations during his adult life, including the NAACP youth chapter at Highland Park Community College, the Nation of Islam, the African Nationalist Pioneers, the Group of Advanced Leadership, the Freedom Now Party, the Megar Uhuru, and the Revolutionary Action Movement, or RAM, the Dodge Revolutionary Union Movement, DRUM, the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, LRBW, the Communist League, the Communist Labor Party, UAW Local 600, and the League of Revolutionaries for a New America. That's like a whole timeline of struggle right there. General was a natural organizer who maintained strong and enduring relationships with Black liberation, grassroots, and radical activists in Detroit and around the world. In the late 60s, he was the primary conduit that brought together Detroit's distinctive class-oriented Black power movement, connecting movement intellectuals to Detroit's Black working class while building working relationships with disparate groups of grassroots activists. Beginning in 1968, Baker and his comrades in the League in the Revolutionary Union movement and the League engaged in a number of wildcat strikes to combat racism, production speed-ups on the job, and the UAW. General and the LBRW hoped these battles would give a rise to the growth of Black Revolutionary Party that could challenge and overthrow the capitalist system. But racial, legal, and labor reforms, as well as the subsequent split within the group, precluded this from occurring. Following the League split in 1971, Baker and his comrades joined the Communist League, which subsequently evolved into the Communist Labor Party, and later the League of Revolutionaries for a New America, Black-led, anti-revisionist communist movement that were under the leadership of Nelson Perry. Again, we are so honored for all of you to be joining us and to engage in this history of a revolutionary. And we will start it off first. We're going to intro with the clip of General Baker talking about how Detroit he actually was.
And before we start the clip, can we just do one housekeeping notion or moment? If you need closed captioning, please press more and then hit closed captioning to activate it on your screen. Thank you. Back to you, Sierra.
I was born in Detroit. I got one other little blemish on my birth record, and that is Dr. Ocean Sweet, the famous doctor that came and built a house over in the white community that was surrounded and attacked. There's a lot of books written about his story called The Ark of Justice. Well, he delivered me. His signature is on my birth certificate. And my mama used to talk about how much she liked Dr. Sweet. So that was my introduction to the city. I was born and bred here. The political struggle is always higher than the economic struggle. The economic struggle is a struggle where you can't fight for nothing but reform. You want better conditions of your labor, higher pay, all those things. Political demands are different. Political demands are demands against the government. And that's a higher level of struggle than the struggle against the economic demands at each plant. Because it unites us as a class, right? You're no longer fighting an individual employer. Now you're fighting a whole class of people that's set against you. Mm-hmm. We see that as a higher form of struggle.
Thank you. And shout out to Colleen and Rita, who are running tech for us, Elizabeth, who is doing the closed captionings. And thank you so much for Pam for being very intentional about being able for all of us to participate. Today's going to be a wonderful panel. We are joined by Carolyn Baker, daughter of General Baker, an organizer, educator at the General Baker Institute. We will also be joined by David Goldberg, professor of history and African American studies at Wayne University, and author of the forthcoming biography of General Baker. Pam Sporn, our leaders bringing us together here, director of Detroit 48202. If you haven't had a chance to check that out yet, it will be available for a couple of more days. We're going to kick off this incredible event by another native, born and bred Black revolutionary from Detroit, Dr. Barbara Rimsby, who is an award-winning historian of the Black Freedom Movement, director of the Social Justice Initiative at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and a leader in the movement for Black Lives. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Rimsby.
Thank you so much, Ciara. And I want to really thank the organizers of this event. I've been on webinars all week long. And of course, yesterday was May Day. So I was very excited and looking forward to this May Day panel honoring the incomparable General Baker and the wonderful filmmaking talent and commitments of my sister, Pam Sporn, and just to be with this great panel. This is not an academic presentation, so anyone who is expecting that, you will be disappointed. And I'm going to be brief because I'm really looking forward to the other remarks and to our conversation that will follow. What I want to offer are some reflections on the Black radical tradition and Detroit's place in it, as a historian, as an activist, and of course, as a Detroiter. You know, there's a number of sort of quote unquote revitalization campaigns and capitalist branding schemes that use the label "Made in Detroit." Well, in many ways, I think about that. And I think I was made in Detroit in a very different kind of way. I grew up in Detroit in the 1960s and 70s, which was an amazing time. Most people remember the 1967 rebellion as a landmark political event, as a really, pivotal and galvanizing event. And I do too. I was 10 years old at the time. And in some ways, it's my first political memory. I was trying to make sense of the politics of race and rebellion, and capitalism, even though I didn't have a name for it. But I also remember the years that followed as a time of rich, robust, and sometimes raucous political community, as organizers and activists and rabble rousers and amazing human beings came together in all kinds of forums and in organizations in Detroit. And as a teenager, I observed some of it, but I was also fortunate enough to meet a number of people who were defining figures in that period. I was reminded as I thought of today's gathering of people like Gloria House, who's also known as Aneb Kotsitsile, was active in SNCC, was of course a talented poet and writer, was engaged in South African and Cuban solidarity, later doing political prisoner work. She and I worked together around the release of Ahmed Rahman, former Black Panther. I think of people like Kenny Cockrell, a lawyer and co-founder of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. I observed as a teenager many of Kenny Cockrell's very theatrical speeches and orations in which he broke down complex ideas and challenged you to debate if you were inclined. And then there was Jimmy and Grace Lee Boggs, leftist organizers and intellectuals. Their evolution and revolution in the 20th century was kind of my introduction to the big idea of revolution as a possibility. And then Walter Riley, former bus driver, labor organizer, Black communist, now people's lawyer in Oakland. And then there was General Baker, who was this figure to be in awe of, and an auto worker, an organizer extraordinaire, but also this powerful thinker and intellectual, a person who, we not only knew of as one of the, forces within the League of Revolutionary Black Workers and the Revolutionary Union movement, but also someone who had a command of a large bulk of information, analytical frameworks, theories, history, etc. And I have to say, my day gig is as a professor, and I'm trained as a historian. But when I think of those very larger than life intellectual figures, I know he's a political figure. I know he was an auto worker. I know he was, a brother that organized people on the corner. But he was also this powerful, powerful thinker. And those two things were related. And it gave me a sense of possibility of what intellectual work in service to movement looks like, and the importance of taking ideas seriously in the context of that work. Detroit was the host to a variety of sectors of the left, from revolutionary nationalists to Black socialists and communists. As Cedric Robinson, my late friend and colleague, talked about the Black radical tradition, he talked about it as bringing together a myriad of paths that Black people have taken to try to get free and to navigate a path toward liberation. It is distinct from finding a room or a corner or a basement in the dilapidated house of racial capitalism, but rather represents the struggles and strategies and movements that have been crafted in the process of trying to build something new. I think of my own work as an organizer and a writer and a historian, and it's been very much influenced by the traditions that I witnessed and had the privilege of being a part of during my younger years in Detroit. My work on Ella Baker attempted to map out some of the crevices of the Black radical tradition that are often ignored, the role of women, the role of radical women, the role of grassroots activists, and the radical democratic threads of that tradition that reject the politics of respectability. My work on Aslanda Robeson tried to tap into that anti-colonial and anti-imperialist part of the tradition. And most recently, my work with the Movement for Black Lives has highlighted the role of Black left feminism. All of these strains and threads were strains and threads in the Detroit movement that, again, as a young person on the fringes of the movement at that time, very much informed my work, my sense of the world, my sense of possibility, and my sense of my obligation of the work I needed to do in the world. In terms of my own activist praxis, there are many chapters of it, but one of the most significant in terms of our purposes today, and where I have very vivid memories of Jen Baker, is the Black Radical Congress, which convened about 2,000 Black radical activists and artists and writers, intellectuals in Chicago in 1998. And Jen Baker's presence was very much felt at that event. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, Detroit was the epicenter of the nation's Black radical tradition in many ways. And we have from the bold and brazen and beautiful to the wild and wacky conversations, organizations, campaigns, etc. But I think of three themes that are very palpable in the movement today that emerge out of Detroit. And one is what we now call intersectional radical politics. All intersectional politics are not radical because they don't map all the intersections, but radical intersectional politics. And what I mean by that is looking at the ways in which race and class and gender come together, right? So when you have movements that are talking about the racism of the cops, and of course we were talking about it in Detroit in the 1970s, the racist program Stress, Stop the Robberies, Enjoy Safe Streets, was this police decoy unit that was setting up and then beating and committing all kinds of acts of violence against our people in the alleys and all kinds of places in Detroit. So there was that, but that could never be separated from the class politics, because everybody was connected to the auto industry in one way or another. You either worked there, your parents worked there, your parents worked at an industry connected to the auto industry. So the idea of an industrial working class that was largely Black in the communities I lived in, that were fighting both racism of the state and the exploitation of capital was just a given. The thing I think the movement was weaker on was a question of gender, but even at that time, people like Marianne Kramer were holding sessions on what was then called female liberation. The other characteristic I think of, which was really important to me in that time, is internationalism. So, you know, my world was very small as a Black teenager. My parents had come from Mississippi and Georgia as sharecroppers and worked in the factories. They were working class people. They hadn't traveled any place in the world. We didn't know anybody that had been any place in the world, you know, kind of got glimpses of the world through books and television. But to the degree that I went to and participated in discussions and forums at Wayne State and other places in the city and read publications like the Inner City Voice and the Black Panther Speaks, I got a window into a larger world that I felt connected to, that I saw parallels in my own experience, and that I felt I had to engage. The war in Vietnam was going on, anti-struggles in Africa. The world was on fire, and the radical activism of people like Jen Baker and the Boggses and Walter Riley and others in Detroit at that time gave us a sense of connection to the world and insisted that we have a commitment to a world struggle. And then the final thing I'll say in terms of that tradition is the intellectual vibrancy. I spoke about this a little bit when I was talking about Jen Baker as a people's intellectual. But I think sometimes, you know, the discussion between doing and thinking about what we do gets bifurcated. And people say, well, we don't have the luxury to sit around and read something. We don't have the luxury to debate something. But some of the most serious activists involved in some of the most high stakes struggles that you can imagine, including in Detroit in that period, South Africa in another period, revolutionary situations all over the world, have insisted on making room for struggle and study and debate. And Jen Baker was a model for that. So I'll just, close, by saying, as I think of the example of someone like Jen Baker, I think of every radical is not a revolutionary. Every radical thinker is not an organizer. Everyone who is an organizer does not have the patience and humility to move large numbers of people in thought and action, and to hold onto their own integrity and humanity in the process. And when I think of Jen Baker, and I didn't know him intimately, I knew him, but I didn't know him as well as obviously some other people participating today. But my image of him, my impression of him, the way he landed and impacted me was that he was precisely that kind of person. And we indeed need more Jen Bakers in the struggle today. I'll stop there and I look forward to the conversation.
So coming out of the rebellion, that's why we turn all our work towards organizing inside these factories, because that's where we had strength, and that seemed to be the only place they needed us. So within a year's time, after the end of the rebellion, Drum was born. And that's when the organization in the factory kind of took off.
What is Drum?
Drum was called the Dodge Revolutionary Union Movement. And it was at the Hamtramck assembly plant that made the Dodge car. everybody used to refer to that Hamtramck assembly plant as Dodge, Main, or Old Dodge, Main. And because of that, we just named it Drum. We weren't going to be a new union.
Nope.
We weren't going to be nobody's caucus. So we declared ourselves a revolutionary union movement. And we were Dodge because that's what we made there.
And what we did was, we not on, you know, although the workers inside the factories would lay the foundation as to what the newsletters looked like, and we began to set up a printing apparatus. Women was backing that up because we did the typing. We knew how to, you know, began to learning how to put the stuff together. A lot of folks didn't know how to do a leaflet. I remember I went in the office one day and I said, Jen, I got to put this leaflet together for the, I sat up there all day. He said, you can't put that out. It don't look that good. And he was learning too, you know, and so we all learned how to put these leaflets together, how to justify without a justifying machine, because these old justifying machines that the newspapers had used at that time, they would work sometime and sometime they didn't. So our people got together and learned we would learn how to justify all our little newsletters and stuff like that. But that became the tools for organizing, not only just in the factories and not only just in the schools, but in the hospitals also.
I'm loving these little snippets of history. And if you haven't gotten a chance to check out Detroit 48202, you will have a little bit more time, but do not sleep on this. Thank you so much, Dr. Rimsby, for opening us up. For folks who are on our Zoom, just so you know, we will have a question and answer portion at the end. Please use the chat, use the Q&A function to enter your question, and we can get to it at the end of the opening statements by folks. I want to next introduce David Goldberg. I had the opportunity to get to know David as much as you can get to know someone over Zoom during the pandemic in a course that the General Baker Institute was holding on the Negro National Colonial Question that was written by Nelson Peary and members of the Communist League. David teaches African American Studies at Wayne State University. He is also affiliated with the General Baker Institute, as well as the annual Detroit Speaker Series. He is currently working on 2 books about General Baker, a reader as well as a biography. David, thank you so much for joining. I'm ready for you to drop gems. It's been a pleasure to get to know you.
Well, thank you for that. I don't know about gems being dropped. I clearly drew the short straw by following Barbara, so I'll do my best. And my voice, you have to excuse me today. My son had his first soccer game the other day, and he damn near scored, and I lost my mind, so my voice is a little off. But I think, you know, Barbara had it exactly right regarding General. And I wanted to maybe tell a few stories that I think would echo some of the points that she was making. He was one of the finest historians I've ever met. You know, he used to find documents that I couldn't find in the same archive. So he was, you know, Jen used to say we have to turn thinkers into fighters and fighters into thinkers. And he was the amalgamation of those two, right? And that's really the struggle. He was an internationalist, as was mentioned too, and because it's May Day, I wanted to tell a quick story about this, and Pam will talk a little bit more about his trip to Cuba later. But I always love this story because General liked to, I think, talk about it in terms of his kind of evolution politically. He started off as a pretty dyed-in-the-wool Black nationalist. In fact, by the time he was about to go to Cuba, he was planning on getting a job in the auto industry so he could learn a trade, with the intention of taking that trade to liberated African nations and helping them with their socialist development, right? So this is in kind of like 1963, he had planned on taking off. But anyway, in 1964, he's part of a group of, I think, 84 people that go to Cuba, students, and they're violating the travel embargo. And so Jen goes with, and I should make mention of these gentlemen's names, but he goes with 3 other people from Detroit, Charles Mao Johnson, Baba Charles Simmons, and Luke Tripp. And they go down there and they meet with a number of people. They're very excited to go down there and they obviously meet with Fidel Castro. In fact, they played baseball with him. They meet with Che Guevara, of course, but they were particularly interested in meeting with Robert F. Williams, right, who was a hero to them. Robert F. Williams from Monroe, North Carolina, right? And anyhow, while they're down there for a couple months, and they're looking at their passports. And on the passports, it had all the lists of the other nations that they couldn't go to. So they started looking at it, and something struck them. On this list is a series of nations, but it wasn't kind of like the ones that you would assume, right? Russia wasn't on there, right? East Germany wasn't on there. You could still travel to those places. You could travel to those. I shouldn't say still, because they changed it shortly before. But you couldn't travel to North Vietnam. You couldn't travel to Cuba. You couldn't travel to China. And you couldn't travel to North Korea. But there was one other nation that they couldn't figure out why it was on the list, because they're operating on kind of a third worldist, Maoist lens. And lo and behold, it's Albania, small Eastern European nation. And so what they did was that they're operating on the principle that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So they went to each embassy to talk to the people, tell the story about the plight of Black people in America, and to talk to their ambassadors. And they came to the Albanian embassy and they said, look, we didn't understand, quite frankly, why you were on this list. And the guy at the Albanian embassy shook his head and he said, my friend, we've been fighting imperialism since Julius Caesar. And then they got it. But I think I bring that story up to show you the internationalist element of this, but also to show you that Cuba was a turning point, I think, for General. Obviously, he came back. He didn't wind up going to Africa, and he cast down his bucket where he was, and he started getting to work on building a Black radical revolutionary movement in Detroit. And so while we think about Drum, which he's most known for in the Revolutionary Union Movement, the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, what isn't as well known is the fact that they started to build out this idea around 1964, 1965, upon their return from Cuba. They put forth a Black newspaper called Black Vanguard, right? And this was an organ associated with the Revolutionary Action Movement, but also associated with the student group that they had developed earlier at Wayne State called Uhuru. And what they used to do is they would read articles from Robert F. Williams. In fact, in the edition where they first make the call for a League of Revolutionary Workers in 1965, 4 years before the League of Revolutionary Black Workers is formed. And they pretty much lay out in 1965 what that would look like. The power that Black people had at the point of production because of racial capitalism, right? Meaning that their analysis was, from being in and around those plants, that because of the nature of racism on the job and in the unions, Black people predominated at the earliest, heaviest, most, what they used to refer to as man-killing jobs at that time in the plant. And because of that racism, they occupied the very beginnings of production. And they realized that if they organized Black workers together, they could shut down Chrysler's entire production, right? And that was the basis upon which they analyzed their situation, and they decided that their greatest amount of power was by organizing at the point of production. To me, and I think to General too, that was kind of a tremendous advancement in kind of like the Black liberation struggle in the 1960s, because they identified a particular place where they could wage struggle, and that was at the point of production. And I think that's pivotal. So they have this idea in 1965, and they understand it as a complex movement. It's not just workers or Black workers. It also involves students and organizing the community, right? And so they write these long papers that are far too long for anyone to read. They pass them out. People would throw them out. But they learned in the process of their activities, right? And so by the time the Great Rebellion comes in 1967, they've learned from some of their mistakes. And so in the clip that we saw, when we see Marion and Jen talking about making those newsletters, at this time, they're much more succinct. They're shorter, they're digestible. They've learned from the mistakes of the past, and they start to put those things into action. I want to talk a little bit about the importance of the rebellion on their ability to galvanize support for what they were doing. It should be noted that like a month before the rebellion, there was a group in Detroit, and it consisted of Kenny Cockrell, who was mentioned before, John Watson, General Mike Hamlin, others. They had a group called the Black Liberation Party, in which a month before the rebellion, they started to chart out a course for building a Black liberation movement in the city. But the impetus really comes with the rebellion itself. And for those that are unaware of the scope of the rebellion, it's the largest in the 60s, 5 days long in total. 43 people are killed, 33 Black people, predominantly by the police and the armed forces that had occupied the city. I always like to tell my students this because it's kind of an unfathomable number. But when the rebellion occurred in Detroit, they called in so many armed forces, including the police, the state police, surrounding police forces, 2 sections of the Army, the National Guard. There were 17,500 armed personnel in Detroit. And after 9/11, for example, the United States invaded the entire country of Afghanistan with less troops than were in the city of Detroit in 1967. Right. In fact, the National Guard during the rebellion fired 155,000 rounds of ammunition right throughout the city. And after the rebellion, people started picking these up and started drill pressing them and tying ropes through them and wore them as a medallion of strength of surviving the military occupation that people faced. And so what happened in the wake of that is you had a spate of organizing. And it was only possible because people had already been doing that work, right? So they're able to kind of see the kind of clamoring for somebody to give it some organizational shape. And this is what General and his peers really seized upon. First with the inner city voice, and then by organizing the plants, first at Dodge, Maine, right? And this, of course, is where General got fired. And he got fired very quickly, I should add, right? They had a wildcat strike in May, and it was the first. And after this is when they formed Drum. And it was actually called by 2 white women in the trim department, right? And General supported them and made sure that everybody stayed out in a way that, he and his comrades in that plant made sure nobody went back in that plant. But he was targeted and was fired as a result of that, right? And in fact, he couldn't find work in the plants until about 1973, 1974, because he had been blacklisted from the auto industry. He's only able to eventually get work in the plants because he uses the assumed name of a comrade from Ram from Cleveland, Alexander Ware, also known as Alexander Ware Bay. And then he hires into Ford. He's known throughout that plant as Big Al, right? Until he's busted. However, in the contract, it said that if you had a job for over a year and you maintained that job, then they couldn't fire you. So he winds up going to, he has to have a hearing. And I wanted to kind of tell this story, and I'll perhaps end here, but I think it kind of reflects on the Black radical tradition and the weight of McCarthyism, right? Because the gentleman that represented General during his grievance hearing was a man named David Moore. And David Moore was a Black communist from Detroit who had been blackballed by Walter Reuther for his involvement in helping to organize Black workers and for being associated with the CP at the initial organizing struggle at the Rouge plant, right? Dave Moore had been in the National Negro Congress and was organizing people into the union, behind the scenes, because you had to do that because Ford had his goons, right? And what's so tragic is General was relatively unaware of Dave Moore until Dave Moore finally got hired back into the union after Reuther's death and was able to defend Jen and get him his job back, right? So he could maintain his job at the Ford plant. General used to say that he didn't get back pay though. So he said he did 40 years to get 30 years, right? And I bring that up because it shows the power of repression on kind of keeping the ties that bind radical activists and revolutionary activists together. And one of the most prescient things about General today is that he often did work that, as other people kind of adapted to shifting times during the Reagan era, Jen stayed true to his analysis and his belief that capitalism had to be overthrown, right? And sometimes that led to kind of, particularly in the 80s, times when mobilizations and activities, there'd be 10 people there. And General used to make the argument, you know, we've been here before, we have to just wait until the few have become many, right? And I think that's critically important, because while we focus on kind of like people who are active and the work that they're doing, and in this case, General was quite young when Drung was formed, we sometimes leave out the part of them keeping this tradition of revolution alive, right? And he carried forth that struggle. He bridged generations, right? And now the few are becoming many. And General is the ideal person to kind of learn from, and to learn from not only kind of what he did, but also how he adapted to shifts in the broader political economy and responded accordingly. So I thank you for your time, and I hope I did well enough following Dr. Rimsby, who I have a great deal of respect for.
And then, David, are you showing some videos? Did you have video clips? No, I think Colleen is helping. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I had one short audio clip, I'm sorry. And this pertains to Hamlet fire, which occurred in 1991, chicken McNugget processing plant, in which workers were killed at the fire. But it's General talking about the question of solidarity and kind of bridging kind of the racial, class, and gender divides. And I think it's fitting for a May Day celebration and kind of to his evolution as a revolutionary.
In the process of solidarity, I learned some things, and I gave this example once before because it's the most bitter one I learned in my life. It's an event that took place on October the 3rd, 1991, in a little city called Hamlet, North Carolina, at a factory called the Imperial Foods that produced chicken nuggets. And what happened on that September the 3rd, a fire broke out in that factory. And 25 workers died in that fire. When the word spread across the country, we all got angry and upset. We raised money at our local and our region, and we sent packages of money to the survivors of that. But that was not enough. Our anger had to take more of a direct affront. May the 2nd of 1992, we organized 5 busloads of workers out of Region 5. We collected money and we rode to Hamlet, North Carolina. We got there, it was a gruesome sight. We got a chance to go inside the factory and we saw, what used to be the refrigerators that became the tombs of most of those workers. You could see the flesh marks on the doors as they clawed and tried to get their way out. But the owner of the factory had chained all the doors shut because he claimed somebody was trying to steal his chicken nuggets. We marched through the streets of Hamlet that day. When we got to the rally at the park, it was a real spirited rally, but one of the most bitter lessons that we had to learn was out of the 25 workers that died in that factory, 13 were white and 12 were black. Not a single one of the members of the white families showed up at that rally, even though the money was for everybody. And it was a bitter pill for us to swallow, you see. This question of solidarity is not an easy question. It got to be fought for. You see, the factory united them. The process of the production of chicken nuggets united them. The fire that broke out in that factory that day united them. The slow-handed death that touched 25 workers united them. But brothers and sisters, the streets divided them. When we raise our voice and sing solidarity, we got to fight to give that meaning. The song says solidarity forever. It don't say solidarity for 8 hours. It don't say solidarity to the midnight hour in case you're working the second shift. That song says solidarity forever. And every time we raise it and fight for it, we got to fight to give that meaning.
Wow, that is one of my favorite speeches that he's done. I've definitely learned a lot from Jen. And I wanted to next, thank you so much again, David, for all that history. And there were definitely gems in there. But I want to next show this video. It's a multimedia political project that I had the opportunity to work on with Pauline Pisano, who is my bandmate and comrade within the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival, as well as filmmaker Peter Kanoy, who is one of my OGs and has been an incredible partner and comrade in this process. This video was inspired by revolutionary struggle, the beauty and power of our humanness, which I feel like Jen is such an incredible illustration of all the things that a revolutionary must be. One who is committed to the movement, to the struggle, who is connected to the working class internationally, who is competent in the ability to carry out the goals of a revolutionary, and who is that marker of intelligent and unselfish leadership that W.E.B. Du Bois says that our movements need. And so without further ado, wanting to share this video in honor of Jen and the Black radical tradition.
Detroit is the harbinger of the nation.
Yes, it is.
Look out, because everybody else is headed this way.
That's right.
The technology that we got confronted with, because we was one industry town, is going to hit every industry everywhere. They are not going back on technology. Those questions, because the capitalists got it all. They got all the money. There's enough money in this society to feed the earth, but they got it all, and we ain't got it. And our strategy is to try to figure out a way to go get it.
There are metals in the sky. So many particles being littered about the halo of our precious earth. There are metals in the sky, and it's getting harder welfare. Salt of the earth. A world that puts people over profit is possible. With every red heartbeat on the streets of Detroit, Caracas, Lancaster, Jerusalem, Flushing, Durham, Miami, LA, and beyond, capitalism is dying. We must unite in order to ensure its demise.
What's that famous quote that I always use from Frederick Engels?
Oh, yeah.
Where he says, what childish innocence it is to use one's own impatience as a theoretically convincing argument.
Mm-hmm.
Don't go blaming the people for not moving. Blame yourself. Because usually what happens when people rise up and the leaders then got demoralized and quit, and then when the folks rise up, ain't nobody there to lead them. You need patience and persistence. Right. And stay with that movement because people do change.
Thank you so much again to Peter, Pauline, the New York State Poor People's Campaign. Thank you so much with Pam for bringing to life, again, resurfacing this incredible history, this incredible life that must be remembered in our struggles. And we must look to General Baker as that beacon for us to follow as folks who are developing as revolutionaries to come. And so we want to continue. We have another clip with General Baker from one of the interviews that Pam did. And then we would like to turn it over to Pam again, our fearless leader, our director, who has brought us together with this discussion. Before we go into the clip, I just want to say Pam is a Bronx-based documentary filmmaker, educator, and activist. She loves listening to people tell stories about standing up to injustice in their own unique, subtle, and not so subtle ways. Pam learned to make films in the 1980s alongside her students at the Arturo Schomburg Satellite Academy in the Bronx. In addition to Detroit 48202, Conversations Along a Postal Route, Pam's films include Making the Impossible Possible, the story of Puerto Rican studies at Brooklyn College, which I'm excited to see, which she co-directed with Tammy Gold, Cuban Roots, Bronx Stories, With the Stroke of the Chaveta, Remembering the Mamacelo Tree, and Disobeying Orders, GI Resistance to the Vietnam War. Pam has received numerous grants and awards, including Just Films, Ford Foundation, the New York State Council on the Arts, the Puffin Foundation, Latino Public Broadcasting, CUNY Caribbean Exchange, and the Bronx Council on the Arts. Pam holds an MFA in the Integrated Media Arts from Hunter College, CUNY. She is a member owner of New Day Films, Distribution Cooperative, New York Women in Film and Television, and the Bronx Filmmakers Collective. I love Pam. Pam is a beautiful comrade and revolutionary. I've enjoyed getting to know you over the last couple of years. So let's get into the clip, and then Pam, you'll take it away.
Cuba was added to the U.S. passport as a place you couldn't go in 1962. So the Cuban Federation of Students sent a group of students to Cuba in defiance of the travel ban in '63. So the following year, they wanted to send another group, and they wanted to make sure they got some black students, and they contacted our little organization. So we sent 4 people to Cuba. I was one of the 4. But Cuba was a revolutionary laboratory. I played baseball with Fidel Castro. We met, with Che Guevara. I met Muhammad Babu, who led the revolution in Zanzibar. Before Zanzibar and Tanganyika was merged, they became Tanzania. I met Chikarema and all of these freedom fighters from Rhodesia and South Africa. They had been wounded and came to Cuba to convalesce. It was a revolutionary laboratory. I spent days with Robert Williams and Mabel, his wife. They're explaining to us the details of the struggle in Monroe, North Carolina. So I got an education in Cuba.
You're on, yeah.
So this is so wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Yes, Cuba was a revolutionary laboratory. I got an education in Cuba. I chose that clip to frame my few words for a couple of reasons. First, General Baker's description of his experience in Cuba in 1964 underlines the internationalism of his working class politics that both Barbara and David have emphasized. And it's just so important to point out, this being a May Day celebration and all. Second, in a roundabout way, that trip to Cuba is the first connection I have to General. So the US government did not take lightly the fact that 84 young people broke the travel ban to go express solidarity with and learn from the Cuban people. When the group returned from Cuba, the House Un-American Activities Committee subpoenaed the leaders of the group and threatened them with contempt of court and all kinds of other scary stuff. So coincidentally, in 1964, HUAC also went snooping around Buffalo, New York, where my family lived. HUAC was investigating progressive labor movement, a newly formed communist group that my father was a member of. One of the things HUAC was so concerned about was PLM's connection to that trip to Cuba. Around the same time that General Baker was refusing to cooperate with the draft board in Detroit, my father was refusing to cooperate when he was called before HUAC in Buffalo. Long story short, because of HUAC, my father got fired from the University of Buffalo, and we all ended up in Detroit. Turns out Wayne State University was the only school in the US willing to give Paul Sporn a job. I must have been about 12 or 13 when my father told me he was going to meet with someone named General Baker. And being such a politically aware child, I couldn't for the life of me figure out why my dad was going to meet with a general. I mean, we were supposed to be protesting against the Vietnam War. I can't say I crossed paths with General Baker growing up. He and my dad were in different left formations, shall we say. But I can say that the radical Black workers movement that General helped develop and lead was a huge part of the total political ambiance that impacted me as a child growing up in Detroit in the 1960s and 70s. It couldn't be avoided. It was in the air, and my generation learned and benefited from it. Here's an example. I was in the 9th grade at Highland Park High School, which was a block or two away from the headquarters of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers over on Cortlandt. I wasn't aware of that at the time, but I do remember walking into one of my classes and someone had written Ford Plantation in big letters on the chalkboard. I said, wow, they're comparing the Ford factory to a plantation. They're making a connection between workers being exploited in the auto factories to enslaved people being exploited on plantations. It taught this 14-year-old white girl something about racism and capitalism. So if General got an education in Cuba, I got an education in Detroit. 40 years later, I'm making the film Detroit 48202 with Wendell Watkins, my friend from Cass Tech. The idea being that Wendell's Postal Route and his customers represented a microcosm that could reveal a from the ground up telling of the city's history of working class struggle, disinvestment by industry, and community-led revitalization. Early in production, I was telling Barbara Rimsby about Wendell's customers who we were interviewing and some of the powerful stories they were telling us. Miss Owens talking about how as a teenager, she and her family was some of the first people to move into the Sojourner Truth homes under armed guard, of course. Mr. Hewitt talking about coming up to Detroit from West Virginia in the 1950s, getting fired from Ford and hired at a DeSoto plant in the very same day. Kim Moore remembering being 6 years old during the '67 rebellion and her grandmother pulling her in from the porch out of fear that she'd be shot by the National Guard troops riding down their street. Barbara said something like, "Those are really good stories. How are you going to insert a broader political and historical analysis? Why don't you interview General Baker and Marion Kramer?" I didn't know if they'd want to be bothered with me, but when I reached out, General and Marion were more than accommodating. That interview did just what Barbara suggested it might do. General and Marion laid out Detroit's history of about 100 years from a radical class perspective, and they gave an overall context to Wendell's insightful reflections and his customers' powerful memories. General took on the role of a griot in the film, a voice we keep returning to for wisdom. So I'm so grateful for Jen's and Marion's participation in Detroit 48202, because I wanted the film to remain rooted in community voices rather than talking heads. I'm not saying that to diminish the contributions of scholars Tom Segru and June Manning Thomas. They provided invaluable history and insight. And what I loved about both Professor Segru and Professor Thomas being in the film is that they both have deep personal ties to the city, not just scholarly ones. But the film had to push to the center the voices of Detroiters who built the city's wealth, who fought to break through racial and economic barriers, changed Detroit, and continued to do so. So I'll end by remembering General Baker fondly and saying thank you to Marion and Carolyn for sharing him with the world, and thank you for developing the General Baker Institute to keep alive the movement that he so much committed himself to. Thank you, everybody.
I always have hope. I have faith in the working class. I'm always got that type of hope, because I know I've seen them rise up before, and I know when they rise, you have to either you gonna rise with them or you gonna move your butt aside.
Some concrete examples of
Well, and for an example, mine is to a much smaller scale. I was just shocked at Dodge, Maine. When we went out there for the first time and second time, to pass out those leaflets, and workers start staying out. It took a while for them to get it in their head. They had even some white workers saying, "Stay out," because if they ask me, I'm staying. And some of them, we all of a sudden it came a day, they stayed, and they began to realize they shut Dodge, Maine down.
You need patience and
That's right.
persistence, and stay with that movement, because people do change. When we struck Dodge, Maine, we didn't know what to do that morning when we set them conga drums out at the plant gate and started beating the conga drums and
Thousands.
And we looked up and we got 4,000 black workers on the street and don't know what to do with them. Don't let nobody think that you knew what you was gonna do with them, because they lying. I always say, be careful what you call for, because somebody might answer.
Again, if you haven't had a chance to check out this film, please do. I'm learning so much, and I am so grateful to be in the space with all of you. Thank you so much again, Pam. I next want to introduce one of my dear comrades, Carolyn Baker. I'm going to try not to embarrass you, but I love you so much. I remember meeting you a few years ago. We had stayed overnight in this hotel, but neither of us had gotten there, before it was time to go to sleep. And so I woke up to Carolyn, and yeah, we just got to talking and about our exes and everything else. And I didn't even know at all what an incredible organizer and intellectual in her own right Carolyn is. And I was never able to meet her father, but based off of the stories and the videos like these that I've been able to glean a little bit from him, and definitely feel that spirit within Carolyn that lives on. And thank you, Carolyn, for trusting us with your father's legacy. Carolyn is a member of the Popular Education Project and is on the coordinating committee for the Poor People's Campaign in Michigan, and is also a founder and a part of the General Baker Institute in Detroit. And so I'll pass it over to Carolyn.
Hey, thanks for having us, or having me, and thank you, Pam, for putting this together. Thank you, Dr. Rimsby. Thank you, David. Thank you, Zilla. Thank you, Sierra. Thank you, Colleen. Thank you, Rita. So yes, General Baker Institute, it was started, first of all, I picked that clip. We all got to pick a clip. I picked that clip because it shows both my mom and my dad talking. And so I always forget how blessed I am to have those two as parents, because they're just mom and dad. And so the relationships some people have with their mom and dad is like, yeah, mom and dad. And so it's always good to hear how people feel about them when I talk to them. But the idea for the General Baker Institute started to show you kind of a revolutionary mindset my mom has. Is as soon as he passed away, and my dad passed away on May 18th. And so one of the anniversaries of his passing will be coming up. So May is usually always hard for my family. But immediately after his passing, my mom kicked into education mode. She was like, we got to do education. And also preserving our history. We started an oral history project for opportunity for those. A lot of people have written on the league. A lot of folks have done forums on the league, but a lot of the members of the league never got to tell their stories. And she was like, people have always made money off of our story, but we never get to tell our story. And so, we started working on an oral history project, and some of those videos live on a website, revolutionaryblackworkers.org, and some clips from that. And so that's how it started. She wanted to try to record get the oral history of folks who were a part of this history. And if folks are still out there who we haven't recorded, and you're watching this, we still want to record you. And also the importance of educating. She wanted to have a center where we can do education. But as we sit here today, I'm sitting here and Dave is sitting right across from me. We are currently inside the General Baker Institute, which sits at the old Mays Printing company that was on Livernois. It's the first Black printing company in the city of Detroit. So the General Baker Institute is a print shop. We always say we're a print shop. But what that looks like and what that feels like, if you ever got a chance to meet him and hang out with him and have a relationship with him, this space tries to embody him as a person. So if you didn't get to meet him, when you come here and feel the warmness of the space and see the different diverse people in the space, and the people sharing meals, people printing, like one of the shirts that we print t-shirts. We have our own clothes. Dave's wearing one too, but we have a clothing line that we started for political education. People having debates, people having conversations, people skill sharing, intergenerational conversations. While we're sitting in here, we have members of the league, former members of the league who are in the other room watching this program. So people are always coming in and out. We have book collections that we have the Baker's Family collection here. We have the Midwest Labor Library that my dad helped run that is coming over here. So all of those things are in this space. So if you ever got to meet him, you will feel it. If you never got to meet him, when you're in this space, you will feel it. And so this space is an extension of his life and his legacy. You'll see many different folks in this space. We have not had a grand opening because of COVID, but we were able to go out in the streets during the uprisings this summer and to be amongst the young people who were fighting every day. And through that, we were able to bring out some of the elders to have conversations. And so we developed these relationships with young people, and they found out about the space. So we never had an official grand opening, but for those who know about the space, they still come and drop in. And what we're going to show is one of the music videos that was created over the summer by one of the young people who was marching every day with the organization Detroit Will Breathe. And you'll see images in this music video of young people coming together. And other reason I picked that clip, and I love how the video that Sierra and them did, had said, we got to figure out a way to go get it. And in this clip, you will see that energy still alive today in Detroit. And so I'm going to end there. So General Baker Institute, you can follow us on all social media platforms, find out more about us. Like I said, we haven't had an official grand opening, but we are open. And ways you can support the General Baker Institute is to come here, have a conversation with us. People have brought books. All the books I have in the space right now are donations that people brought. People brought coffee cups, people come here. If you ever had a grandmother on a neighborhood street in that house that people hung out at, and they came to just because they wanted to see who was there, or they just felt like coming to hang out, that's kind of the space. And that's how it's become. And people have come and brought things, and always accept monetary donations, but more so than that, the conversations and the relationships that we are trying to build, because folks are so fractured right now. And so it's so important to build relationships in order to connect folks to the fronts of struggles that are out here. And so that's what we do here. When you first enter the space, you'll see stuff from the Poor People's Campaign. You'll also see that our task is to make thinkers out of fighters and fighters out of thinkers are the first things that hit you when you walk into this space. And then you'll see other banners. You'll see a Wu-Tang banner. You'll see Yemeni Liberation Movement banner. So you'll see all these movements coming together. And that's a sign of people coming together to fight a bigger cause. And so this video is by Jay Bass. He was one of the organizers with Detroit Will Breathe. He is one of the organizers with Detroit Will Breathe, and I hope you all enjoy it.
2 days, 11, 12 days, 2 weeks, 21 days.
It's been a month already.
Day 41, we just getting started. It's day 50. 55 days, we prepared to go another 55 days. 2 months in the street.
It's been 65 days.
71 days out here.
75 days later, I say that we are freedom fighters.
Say 100!
We ain't gonna let up. Whole squad here, we fed up. We ain't gonna let up. Whole squad here, we fed up. We ain't gonna let up. Whole squad here, we fed up. We ain't gonna let up. Whole squad here, we fed up. So I'm taking these steps. What's going on? I know that it's wrong. Just take a deep breath. Gotta be strong and keep moving on. We ain't gonna let up. Whole squad here, we fed up. We ain't gonna let up. Whole squad here, we fed up. I'm getting sick and tired of being sick and tired. When the hate gon' stop getting pulled over, I ain't even driving. I just pray to God it ain't a racist cop. If I go to jail, don't even put me in a holding cell. I'm finding out they really trying to trap me in a system, put me in a prison. What I'm finding out, not me. Young king, but they trying to do me like I'm Rodney. Gotta find me. I ain't hiding if you looking for me. I'm in my streets with about 3,000 people who ain't leaving till we get some justice. I mean it if you think I'm bluffing. The police, you know they can't be trusted. So we gotta stand up for it. The people united will never be divided. Gotta change just for it. Gotta plan stuff for it. Looking at their budget like fuck it. We gon' just demand most of it. Got a lot of stuff that we can do with that. We could get some money to the school with that. Tell me what you would do if some of you was black. We ain't got no option, now we shoot it back. Blah. We ain't gon' let up. Whole squad here, we fed up. We ain't gon' let up. Whole squad here, we fed up. We ain't gon' let up. Whole squad here, we fed up. We ain't gon' let up. Whole squad here and we fed up. So I'm taking these steps. What's going on? I know that it's wrong. Just take a deep breath. Gotta be strong and keep moving on. We ain't gon' let up. Whole squad here and we fed up. We ain't gon' let up. Whole squad here and we fed up. Look what they did to G. Look what they did to Bree. Look what they did to E. Look what they did to me. Hit me with tear gas, pepper spray to the face, and I couldn't see. Then the next week, DPD ran me over with an SUV. You know that they don't care about us. Anytime that you hear about us, they say that we violent, causing a riot. Okay, let me clear it all up. They don't like it when you telling the truth, and when your skin got that melanin too, they wanna silence that. So they gon' show it to your protest, riot, get shields, and you looking like damn, where the riot at? You know it's all part of their plan, but God's plan way larger than man. I've been working hard as I can, know what's coming, see it all in advance. You know it's fate when it fall in your hands, and everybody around you all understands. What it's gonna take is the people together, and you know they hate to see us together. Let's go. We ain't gon' let up. Whole squad here and we fed up. We ain't gon' let up. Whole squad here and we fed up. We ain't gon' let up. Whole squad here and we fed up. We ain't gon' let up. Whole squad here and we fed up. So I'm taking these steps. What's going on? I know that it's wrong. Just take a deep breath. Gotta be strong and keep moving on. We ain't gon' let up. Whole squad here and we fed up. We ain't gon' let up. Whole squad here and we fed up.
March today! March today! March today! March today! March today! March today! March today!
Yo, Jay Bass, that was awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Carolyn and the GBI. Who all over there from the league? Who's over there?
We got Mitch and Alonzo in the room.
Oh, Lord.
The Mitchell.
Oh, Lord. Yes, we had the opportunity, like Carolyn said, General Baker Institute is a place to come together to organize, and also, as Jen would, have it no other way, to be educated. And I got a chance to also get to know some of the members of the league through that study on the Negro National Colonial Question. And speaking of questions, we are now getting into our Q&A, and we've asked for folks to submit questions into this Q&A box on the Zoom, if you were on the Zoom, and if you are on YouTube, we are paying attention to the comments. If you'd like to enter in a question in the chat. Again, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to Rita and Colleen for the tech, and Elizabeth for the captions. We could not have this event without all of that incredible work. I'm going to pass it over to Zilla to open up the panel, and we would like to also welcome into this space Marion Kramer, if she's over there. She's not over there. Okay.
I was like, let me pause before I start talking. So first, I just want to say, wow, General Baker is still helping educate a new generation of freedom fighters. And that video, off the hook, loved it, loved every moment of it. So we do have one question from Joseph Price off of YouTube. I remember the CLP bookstore on Woodland Avenue. What happened to the CLP comrades in the Motor City or anywhere else? Is there anyone still around doing those revolutionary things? Can anyone answer that from Detroit or know this information?
Or one of the Mitchells?
What was the question?
What was it? Sorry, what was the question again? I'm sorry.
Okay. What happened to the CLP bookstore on Linwood Avenue? What happened to the comrades in the Motor City or anywhere else? Are they still doing revolutionary things?
Yeah, the people right next door were in the CLP. And hopefully we're working to get one of them here to talk in a second. Carolyn's working on it. But that bookstore was the China Albania bookstore, I believe, on Linwood. And prior to that, it was the Black Star bookstore. They had a press with the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, as well as 2 bookstores, one of which was on DeQuinder. So I think the bookstore shut down, I believe, in the late 70s. And, you know, there are people from the CLP who are all over the city that remain active. Frank Joyce is one who remains active in the city. Obviously, Mitch and Lonzo. A lot of the people that were in the CLP, Marcia, who was here before, was in the CLP, and she's still active in the political sphere as well as in the arts. So part of that generation is the fact that, like General used to say, you know, the victory is in the fight. And most of the people that were involved live that on a daily basis. You know, most of the people that were in the CLP continued to be involved in politics, whether it was in an offshoot of that formation or something else.
Did Carolyn get one of them?
Well, they're just gonna wave at the people. Can y'all say hi to the people?
Hello, how's everybody doing?
Hi, everybody.
Let me just, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Let me jump in for 1 second. You couldn't really see him, but Alonzo here was one of the leading figures of LRUM. And LRUM was such a critical movement within the Revolutionary Union movement. And it was the only gear and axle plant that Chrysler had in the United States. I believe the only other one was in South Africa. So when they shut down that plant, if they had shut it down for more than 1 day, they literally would have shut down all of Chrysler's operations.
Wow. Yeah, because I just know for myself, a lot of the clips and what everyone was saying really struck me, and some things really came out that leads to our next question. Like, what does it look like to be a revolutionary today? Anyone from the panel can take this.
I think Barbara should take that.
I just decided to, I'm starting a new book project, which is called Are We Ready for a Revolution? It's deliberately posed as a question because I think, you know, those of us who've spent time on the left, the question is, you know, time, place, and conditions, right? How do we understand the conditions that we live under right now? Is revolutionary change possible? And a much deeper discussion than we can have right now. I think there's a real challenge to the left to ask the question, what does revolution look like and mean in the 21st century? Because I don't think it means and looks like it did in the 20th century. And so, you know, there's a way we get frozen in time and we feel like we can reenact history, which we really don't have the choice or luxury to do. We're in a different historical moment. So I think, you know, my view is revolution. When I was 18, I thought it was an event. It would happen, and on the other side, everything would be fine and dandy. But I understand now, you know, that it's really what leads up to and what happens after various critical events. So, you know, revolution is a protracted process, not an event, is the first thing. And, you know, so often failures and revolutions are, you know, amalgam of successes and failures. It's not just one or the other. But when there is a major shift in power and we can redefine the basic, you know, contours of society, right, where oppressed people are no longer marginalized and out of power, then we have the challenge of figuring out what do we have the consensus and capacity to build. And, you know, it's more than a notion. So I don't take that question lightly, and it's not a question I can even attempt to answer in the few minutes that we have together. But I do think we're in a period, because of climate, because of the current crisis of capitalism, which is multifaceted and it's not cyclical. It is a game-changing crisis, and they know it. I think we are looking at the potential of radical transformation in the society. And so are we ready for that is the question. So we should continue to ask and take stabs at answering. Very important question.
And there it is, because we got to, and this goes to our next question. And then we're going to wrap up because I probably shouldn't say that, but we're done at 5:30, right? Okay, yeah, so we'll take the time. So what did General Baker mean by turning thinkers into fighters and fighters into thinkers? Like, what do you think, that vibe is? Who like, yes.
You want me to answer?
What do you
I'll take a crack at that. You have a lot of people that study theory and organizing strategies and think about things very deeply, but don't necessarily have the will or the capacity to get out and actually do the fighting. And conversely, you have people who are willing to fight. General in the early 60s had a Malcolm X speech. Malcolm X in the Message to the Grassroots says, y'all are afraid to bleed. And General and his comrades said, we'll bleed, Malcolm, we'll bleed, right? So you need the will to fight, but you also need the intelligence to fight and the study to fight. It's what Barbara was saying before. And you can't do one effectively without the other. And I think that's the core message that he was getting at. And the fact that study and praxis and reevaluating throughout the process of revolutionary struggle is critical.
Perfect. Does Carolyn, I feel like there was a voice with you that wanted to say something.
No, they said that was good, Dave.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, let's bring our international comrades into the Zoom room. Sorry, y'all, let me get to the question. Yeah, can we just talk about the working class international struggle? And also let's try to intertwine that with the with the struggle of the poor and dispossessed in the United States, because it really sticks out to me with the chicken nugget clip about how like the streets divide us and continue to divide us. And that's one way that I sometimes see that like we people living in the United States can't get with the international struggle because there's like divide and conquer that we're sometimes conditioned to. So yeah, we would like to talk about that, especially as we just had May Day. Should I call in somebody? Okay.
I can say something. Yeah. No, I mean, internationalism is more important today than ever. It's always been important. We can't have a U.S. only and U.S. centered view of what social transformation will mean in this coming period. And I think from the rise of right-wing dictators from the Philippines to Turkey to Brazil, as well as the movements for transformation that are coming, grassroots movements from Ecuador, again from Venezuela, movements in South Africa that are trying to take, what we had hoped would be a radical transformation 2 decades ago to another level at this point, So I think there's a lot of hope in the world. What's happening in Chile right now, there's a lot of hope. And I think we need to have transnational formations that connect us to folks around the world. What I will also say though, is this, I use the term racial capitalism. And I think when we talk about the working class, there is a fight in this country right now within the left, which is the sort of colorblind notion or sort of class reductionism. And I think if anything I take from the radical Black left in Detroit is that that's an artificial separation. And so that's true in the world as well. We need to look at what's happening in terms of persistent examples of colonialism, a persistent imperialist attitude and policies vis-a-vis the global South. And even though, Biden is doing it's hard to get worse than Trump, but I mean, Biden is taken some steps to provide some relief to people domestically because a movement has pressured him to do that. But when we look at some foreign policy moves, they are very scary. We also still have the issue of Palestine, which many people on the left refuse to speak out about, which we must speak out about. So I just, those issues come to mind, and it's easier said than done. I think we still are figuring out what principal solidarity looks like, because we can't just say we are with the people of country X or country Y, because we have to know the struggles in those countries to know where to land and where to direct our solidarity, because they're often complex and and layered. So yes, important principle, fight hard for it every day, study, serve, and struggle.
Perfect. So I would like to, I know we are a little pushing it on time. I just want to, my co-moderator, Sierra, she would like to say something, but I do want to just say first, thank you all for this great panel. I wish we just had more time. And yeah, Sierra.
I think I missed QTK in the chat, but it's okay. Yeah, I think General Baker is an incredible example of working class internationalism. I know that one of Jen's comrades, who is also an OG of ours, Willie Baptist, who was a part of the Watts Uprising in 1965, which was a big inspiration for the uprisings which were to follow, including in Detroit, even though the character of the uprising in Detroit was much different. But he talks about after the uprising in Detroit, there was a letter sent to the people, or sorry, the uprising in Watts, there was a letter sent to the people of Watts by the Vietnamese people in struggle, thanking them for the uprising, because they said that because of the Watts uprising, there was a deployment that was supposed to happen of military people to Vietnam. And because of the uprising that occurred, the military were sent to Watts instead of to Vietnam for its scheduled deployment. And so it was able to give the Vietnamese people a bit of a more of a fighting chance. And so I feel like when we think about working class internationalism, that's what it's about. How do we actually organize our struggle here in the United States? How are we able to build the working class so that we can be coordinated enough to strike a real blow at the empire, to make sure that the empire is so busy with us kicking their ass that they're not going around causing all this trouble. And so, yeah, thank you so much for having us. And yeah, Pam, I'll turn it to you.
Okay. This has just been so inspirational. And I want to thank everybody for attending, all of the participants. We encourage you to follow and support the work of all the co-sponsors of this event. General Baker Institute, Social Justice Institute, New Day Films has an incredible array of films about social justice and struggle, People's Forum, and Code Pink. And if you're an educator or an organizer, you can get my film, Detroit 48202, from New Day Films. Look out for David's forthcoming bio of General. It should be great. And special thanks to our moderators, Ciara and Zilla. Thanks to Rita and Colleen, our tech wizards. Thanks for hosting us, People's Forum. And thank you, Elizabeth, for your closed captioning. Really committed to accessibility in all of our media work. So happy May Day. And as General would say, the victory is in the fight. So. Thank you.